the main thing for us was that Simon, our bass player, wasn't with us. For the first time in The Cure have played recently, maybe 3 times in the last sort of 15 years.
Robert Smith, a figure unlike any other in the history of rock music. With his tangled hair, black-rimmed eyes, and a voice that sounds like it echoes from a dark dream, Robert is not just the frontman of The Cure, he is the soul of an entire lost generation. Songs like Boys Don't Cry, Love Song, or Disintegration have become the soundtrack for souls that never found a place in this noisy world. The Cure has sold over 30 million albums worldwide, and their 2018 Hyde Park concert celebrating the band's 40th anniversary moved 65,000 people to tears under the stage lights. Yet while the world calls him the Goth King, the trailblazer of post-punk and alternative rock, Robert Smith chooses to live quietly, free of scandal, without children, without noise, as if fame was never the goal he chased. An artist once expelled from high school for being too influential, who got into backstage fights during a European tour, who was once mistaken for a racist just because of a song title. And yet he's also the man who has stayed with his first love for more than 50 years, never left The Cure no matter who else did, and still stands on stage as he nears 70. The life of Robert Smith is a sad song, deep, hazy, silent, and beautiful in a way no spotlight can capture. What made a teenager once beaten for being different become a global cultural icon? And what truly lies behind the smudged lipstick, the wild hair, and that dreamy stare? Let's find out in this video. Early life. Robert Smith was born in 1959 in Blackpool, but his childhood was never rooted in one single place. His family moved constantly, from Blackpool to Horley, before finally settling in Crawley, West Sussex, the town that would later become the first cradle of The Cure. In small houses with long hallways and rainy southern English evenings, Robert grew up as a quiet boy who often hid in his room, spinning vinyl records, letting music fill the space between himself and the world. His family wasn't poor, but they weren't wealthy either. His father, Alex Smith, had served in the Navy and possessed a deep, warm voice. He often sang to his children at night, passing on the first melodies to Robert without even realizing it. His mother, Rita, played the piano and believed music was the only thing that could help her children find themselves in an increasingly indifferent world. Neither parent forced their kids into anything, but they always encouraged them to play, to sing, as long as it made them happy. Robert was the third of 4 siblings. He wasn't the standout of the family. That was his sister Janet, nicknamed the piano prodigy, who had been taught music from a young age by their mother. In fact, it was Janet who inadvertently pushed Robert in another direction. He picked up the guitar to avoid being overshadowed, to have a voice of his own. My sister was too good, so I had to find another path. And I chose the guitar, a sound that can scream without ever speaking a word. Robert's school years were filled with clashes against rigid norms. He was once beaten after class for wearing a black velvet skirt to school, considered an act of deviance in the 1970s. Teachers called it a rebellious phase, but his classmates treated him like an outcast who deserved punishment. Those experiences didn't change Robert. They just made him retreat further inward, made him more guarded, and pushed him deeper into music as his only safe haven. In 1976, while studying at St. Wilfrid's Comprehensive, Robert and his band Malice, the precursor to The Cure, performed during the school's Christmas event. The show was more successful than anyone expected, but the administration declared that he had a negative influence on other students and decided to suspend him. He was expelled from a place that was supposed to teach young people to be true to themselves. But instead of crumbling, Robert sat down and wrote his first songs. I play by ear, not by sight. I write with loneliness. It wasn't a tragic childhood in the traditional sense, but the way society treated him like an odd child, paired with the silent, non-judgmental support of his family, shaped Robert Smith into a quintessential outsider. one who was strong enough to turn his darkness into music that resonated around the world. Early career. In 1976, after being suspended from school for performing with the band Malice, Robert Smith never returned to the classroom. He chose music, not because it was a path laid out for him, but because it was the only one left open. Along with childhood friends Lol Tolhurst, Michael Dempsey, and Porl Thompson, Robert formed Easy Cure, a rock band infused with cold tones, experimental textures, and influences from post-punk and French philosophy. The name was later shortened to The Cure, a simple title, yet layered with meaning. Music as a cure for loneliness, pain, and being lost. In 1978, The Cure signed with Fiction Records, and at just 19 years old, Robert was already the band's creative leader, lead vocalist, and the one shaping their visual identity. Right from their debut single, Killing an Arab, The Cure stirred controversy. Inspired by Albert Camus' The Stranger, the song was a philosophical metaphor for the absurdity and meaninglessness of violence. But its title was easily misunderstood, and for years, Robert Smith had to clarify that the song was never intended to be racist. If I had known it would be misinterpreted like that, I'd have named it differently. But sometimes the most honest things are the ones most distorted. Their debut album, Three Imaginary Boys, 1979, was a patchwork of emotional fragments, from boredom and sarcasm to emptiness, all expressed through Robert's distant voice and signature icy guitar. But that was only a beginning. With 17 Seconds, 1980, Faith, 1981, and then Pornography, 1982, Robert led The Cure deeper into the shadows of the human soul, where sorrow needed no explanation and where death and meaninglessness appeared as inevitable parts of life. Pornography wasn't just an album, it was a recorded nightmare. During the sessions, Robert fell into a near-total state of despair. He later admitted, "I wrote Pornography because I wasn't sure I'd still be alive after it." The band teetered on the edge of genius and destruction, spiraling into alcohol, drugs, and escalating internal rage. The 1982 tour ended with a literal punch. Robert Smith and Simon Gallup got into a backstage fight in Strasbourg, leading to the band's temporary breakup. Tension, conflict, and sleepless nights had torn their friendship apart. The Cure, after just 3 albums, seemed finished. Yet amid the wreckage, Robert didn't walk away from music. He played guitar for Susie and the Banshees, then formed the side project The Glove with Steven Severin. These detours not only helped him recover mentally, but also expanded his creative mindset, an evolution that would later help The Cure step out of their own shadow. And when he returned to The Cure in 1983, alone, exhausted, but clear-headed, Robert was no longer just an introspective guitarist. He was a musician who had survived the very songs he wrote. And from that wreckage, he was about to write the greatest chapters of his career. Career breakthrough. In 1984, Robert Smith returned to The Cure, standing alone amidst the wreckage left by past conflicts. Friends and bandmates had gone. The group's image was fractured. But instead of retreating, he moved forward, gathering each broken piece to create a new version of The Cure, bolder, more emotionally layered, and wide enough to contain all the pain he had never spoken aloud. The Head on the Door, 1985, marked the first turning point. The familiar gloom was still there, but for the first time, Robert's music sounded beautiful. The song In Between Days, with its bright melody and melancholic lyrics, opened a new path, transforming pain into something you could dance to. The band began attracting attention from the U.S., embarking on international tours and climbing charts beyond the gothic underground scene. But true greatness came with Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, 1987, a bold, sprawling double album filled with stylistic variety. From funk to ballad, from shrieking guitars to whispery vocals, Robert laid out a musical feast as chaotic as his own emotional state. The album was a massive success, putting The Cure firmly on the global map. Just Like Heaven became an iconic hit, a song about love and loss, wrapped in a magical sound that felt like both falling apart and soaring, and that was only the beginning of a masterpiece. In 1989, Robert released Disintegration, an album he wrote at 29, haunted by the sense that time was pushing him toward the edge. "I thought I'd die at 30, so I wrote this album as a farewell," he once admitted. Disintegration wasn't a collection of songs. It was a journey. From the aching solitude of Pictures of You, to the vague despair of Plain Song, to the aching love in Love Song. The album charted high on Billboard, sold over 3 million copies, and remains to this day one of the most complete declarations of love, death, and ego dissolution in popular music. From 1989 to 1992, Robert Smith and The Cure reached their indisputable peak. The Prayer Tour sold out worldwide, and Robert's image became a pop culture symbol, featured on MTV, Rolling Stone, and recognized across all demographics as the singular face of gothic rock. Yet strangely, the more successful he became, the more Robert withdrew. He didn't buy mansions, didn't chase the spotlight, didn't turn The Cure into a marketable brand. In a rock world increasingly commercialized in the early 1990s, Robert Smith held on to one principle. He only wrote music when he had something real to say, and because of that, what he wrote always reached the deepest parts of the listener. Personal life. In a rock world defined by chaos, fleeting romances, endless scandals, and never-ending parties, Robert Smith has always been an exception. He never hid the fact that he was a man of one woman. Since 1972, when he was just 13, Robert met Mary Poole at St. Wilfrid's School in Crawley. They didn't fall in love immediately. They were friends first, gradually finding each other through every stage of growing up. While Robert's band went through constant lineup changes, while he was suspended from school, beaten for wearing a velvet skirt, Mary stayed, quietly, without judgment, without leaving. They officially became a couple in 1976, the same year The Cure was formed, and remained together for over a decade before marrying in 1988. They never had children, not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to. "I can't imagine bringing a child into this world when I'm still figuring out how to survive in it myself," Robert once said. Instead, he chose to love Mary with everything he wrote. Love Song, The Cure's most beautiful love ballad, was written for her. A timeless promise made during those endless tours. No infidelity scandals. No marriages broken under the weight of fame. No regrets after drunken nights. Just a man who always came home, to the woman who once sat and listened as he played guitar at 15. Still, love didn't make Robert Smith's life any lighter. He's battled nameless depressions, anxiety, insomnia, and the feeling of being an outsider among outsiders. At times, he all but vanished from public view, appearing only in studios or on stage, where he could scream without anyone asking, why? Robert never liked the spotlight. He stood in it only because music demanded it. What he truly loved always lived behind the scenes. Mary, a quiet room, a late-night cup of tea, and half-finished drafts. If The Cure is a journey, then Mary is the one constant that never changed course. And if Robert Smith never drowned in the waves of his inner storms, it's because he always had somewhere to return to. Not a place, but a person. Conflict, misunderstandings, and turmoil. The Cure is one of the rare bands that has endured nearly 50 years without being tainted by drugs, arrests, or sex scandals. But that doesn't mean Robert Smith's journey was free of turmoil. In some ways, it was his silence and refusal to publicly explain himself that led to misunderstandings and, at times, misjudgments. The first clash came from the closest place, within the band itself. In 1982, during the tour promoting Pornography, Robert Smith and bassist Simon Gallup had a falling out so severe they ended up physically fighting backstage in Strasbourg. The brawl wasn't just about a disagreement over the set list or sound levels. It was the culmination of months of psychological tension, grueling schedules, and the collision of two strong, creative egos. The Cure nearly fell apart. Robert temporarily left the band, and the group went silent for a year. The second rupture came from another old friend, Lowell Tolhurst, Robert's childhood companion, co-founder of the band, once a keyboardist and later a drummer. After disintegration, Robert had to make the painful decision to dismiss Tolhurst due to his worsening alcoholism, which was directly impacting their performances and working environment. It was a deeply wounding choice. More than anyone, Robert knew how heartbreaking it was to lose someone who had walked beside him since childhood. But he was forced to choose between loyalty to the past and the survival of the band. Not all collisions came from within. From their very first single, Killing an Arab, 1978, Robert Smith was burdened with a label he never intended. Inspired by Albert Camus' novel The Stranger, the song was a philosophical metaphor about the absurdity of human existence. But its title, in a politically sensitive world, was quickly misinterpreted as racist. Worse, it was misquoted by extremist movements. Robert faced ongoing criticism, and he was forced to issue formal statements denying any connection to hate ideologies, adding disclaimers to later releases explaining the song's literary origin. "If I'd known, I would have titled it differently, but I never wrote music to hurt anyone," he said, a belated apology for something he never meant. Years later, Robert still remains a divisive figure among certain critics. Some accuse him of being weird for attention, claiming that the black clothes, the smudged lipstick, and the wild hair were marketing tactics, but they forget. Robert Smith looked like that when he was 16, before contracts, before stages, before any fame. It wasn't a strategy. It was who he was. One of the more recent misunderstandings came from Mark Hoppus's memoir, Blink 182, where he recounted, jokingly, a moment when Robert Smith tried to kiss me at an after-party following their Wembley show in 2004. The story was told lightheartedly, without malice, but it still created a media stir. Robert didn't respond. Perhaps he's grown too used to people talking about him without really knowing him. For over 4 decades, Robert Smith has stood at the center of conflicts, not because he sought them, but because he's the kind of artist who refuses to bend just to please the crowd. He'd rather fight with his best friend, lose a record deal, or be misunderstood, than step away from who he truly is. And maybe that very resolve is why he's still here, under the stage lights, with his guitar, and songs that have never stopped haunting their listeners. Legacy and influence. Robert Smith didn't invent Gothic rock, but he's the one who made it immortal. With smudged lipstick, a distant gaze, and melodies soaked in melancholy, Robert redefined a kind of music that didn't need to scream to feel intense, didn't need darkness to feel cold. He never claimed to represent a movement, yet an entire generation of teenagers dressed in black, wrote diaries with disintegration lyrics, and looked to the Cure as the only friend who truly listened. Robert Smith's influence goes far beyond Gothic rock. He became a model for the kind of artist unafraid to be emotionally honest, never chasing the cool image, never needing scandals or rebellion to be noticed. Artists like Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails, Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, Placebo, Interpol, even Billie Eilish, all cite Robert's music and spirit as a major inspiration. More than that, Robert reshaped how artists approach songwriting, not as a product to be consumed, but as a journey of self-healing. He once said, "Music isn't something to sell. Music is what keeps me from disappearing." In 2019, The Cure was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And during the ceremony, when a reporter asked if he was excited, Robert replied with a deadpan face, "Not as much as you do." The answer, biting, honest, quickly became a viral meme because it captured Robert perfectly. No showmanship, no performance, no faking. Even visually, Robert Smith became a pop culture icon. His face appeared on t-shirts, posters, tattoos, and magazine covers throughout the 80s and 90s. And though the fashion world once mocked his appearance, today his look is revered as a symbol of anti-conformity, a rebellion through stillness. Musically, his legacy isn't just the tens of millions of albums sold, but the survival of souls who once believed they were alone. In Lullaby, Pictures of You, the same deep water. As you, people saw themselves, their unnamed memories, their unanswered questions. And when audiences sing along with him in these twilight concerts, no one cares about genre, trends, or technique. They sing because those songs held them together during their darkest days. That's why calling Robert Smith a musician isn't enough. He's a lyricist for the voiceless, a living proof that you can be different and still be loved. A reminder that even if you carry sorrow, you can still make something beautiful for the world. Life today. Robert Smith is now 65 years old. The once wildly tousled hair is now graying and thin, but he keeps it just the same. A quiet reminder that he never gave up on who he truly is. He still lines his eyes in black, still wears oversized coats and scuffed shoes. But his gaze has changed, no longer fiercely defiant, but quietly observant, as if he's seen enough, heard enough, and understood enough. After more than 16 years of silence, The Cure returned in 2024 with Songs of a Lost World, a new musical journey still filled with nostalgia, loneliness, and unanswered questions. Critics praised the album. Fans embraced it like a gift, not because it went viral, but because it was real. In an age where most fame is algorithm-driven and filtered through curated images, Robert's music still feels like a handwritten journal. Smudged ink, never polished for display. Robert once said he might retire in 2029, on the 50th anniversary of The Cure's first album. But if that farewell ever comes, it won't be loud. No grand farewell tour, no dramatic press release. If anything, it'll be a small stage, a few old songs, and the echo of a guitar under fading lights. Outside of music, he's nearly invisible. No social media, no reality shows, no nostalgic podcast appearances. He lives with his wife, Mary, the only woman he's ever publicly loved, in an old house in Sussex. They raise cats, tend to their garden, and sometimes Robert still writes. Not for release, but to hold on to the parts of himself he's never given away. To many, Robert Smith is an icon. To himself, perhaps he never tried to be anything at all. He is simply a man, lonely, honest, quiet, loyal, who chose to express pain through melody instead of words. And by doing that, he saved millions. Not every artist lives long enough to see their music transcend time. Robert Smith did, not through strategy, but through sincerity. And maybe, after all this, he doesn't need a farewell. Because every time someone plays Love Song, Disintegration, or A Forest, Robert is still there, in the notes, in the darkness, in those who once felt they belonged nowhere. Robert Smith will always be an icon, not just for the songs that made history, but for living true to himself across nearly half a century in a world that never stopped shouting. A man of silence, of steadfastness, of gentleness and depth, who turned loneliness into art and made darkness a refuge for millions of lost souls. He never needed noise to become great. The legacy Robert Smith leaves behind is not just music, it is empathy, loyalty, and proof that you can be yourself and still be loved. What do you think of Robert Smith's emotional journey? Which of his songs has stayed with you the most? Share it in the comments below, because every music memory is part of this story. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next journey, where we continue telling real stories about real people who lived, who hurt, and who left behind something unforgettable. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Goodbye.